Jaguar, a company that used to mean everything in racing, making some of the greatest cars of all time that's sadly been reduced to a failing brand, not making any new cars and ditching their history in a confusing direction and prototypes that hardly hark back to any Jaguar from before.
Despite all of the modern problems that I've lined out with Jaguar today, at points in their life, they were the absolute kings. They were adored by car guys and they were things that were revered. And in my opinion, the last car that properly did that by Jaguar was this one, the Jaguar XKR. Because Jags seem a bit hell-bent on getting rid of their car history at the minute, let me talk you through it a little bit. Jaguar started in 1923 as Swallow sidecars. That then spawned on in 1927 to their later project, the Austin 7 Swallow, which is a rebodied version of the Austin 7 with different chassis and a different body. This became incredibly successful that in 1931 they merged with another company to make their future company SS, where they started making the SS1, the SS2, and in 1935, the SS Jaguar. You can understand why they dropped the name SS, so they became Jaguar. And in that period in the 1930s and the 1940s, Jaguar didn't really get the opportunity to make a lot. Steel was being used more for Spitfires and bombers that were used for the British Air Force, rather than into sports cars and luxury cars. By the end of 1949, William Lyons had unveiled his new engine, an XK engine, which was a dual overhead cam, 3.4 litre inline six. And this, he had to have an incredible car to trial it out with. The XK120. Made from aluminium initially, left over from the war efforts, this car then became mass produced when steel was more widely available, and the name XK120, the top speed, 120 miles an hour, and in 1949, that made it the fastest car in the world. After the XK120, Jaguar had their racing cars that did incredibly well at Le Mans, the C-Type and the D-Type, and in fact, they never actually officially called the car the Jaguar C-Type. It was actually the Jaguar XK120C. C standing for competition, C-Type to shorten it out. They won twice at Le Mans with that car. They then won a further 3 times with the Jaguar D-Type, one in the dreaded 1955 Le Mans race where multiple people were killed and injured when a Mercedes car crashed into the barriers, and 2 more times in 1956 and 1957. Jaguar had 5 Le Mans wins back in the 1950s. In 1961, the Jaguar E-Type came along, one of the most pretty cars ever built, still using a Jaguar XK engine with a 3.8 litre instead of a 3.4 like the earlier cars. This carried on until 1975, when the company was in financial turmoil. Basically what happened, in 1966, Jaguar merged with the British Motor Co-op, then merged with what was at the time Leyland Cars, that then became British Leyland in 1968. This was the beginning of the bad times for Jaguar. They were known across the board at British Leyland back in the 1960s and the 1970s and 80s for horrific unreliability across all of their cars. Even though Jaguar was still under the control of William Lyons, they still weren't able to get away from the poor quality control, the poor production quality, and the poor just general quality of everything to do with the cars. They were not known as the incredible gentlemen's racers and the incredible GT cruisers that you could get for half the budget of the Aston Martins at the time. They were known for being unreliable, leaking British sports cars. It's where the British cars are still thought of today. Aston Martin, Jaguar, Lotus, McLaren. They're not really known for reliability anymore. And it was that time in the 1980s that really put it into people's psyches that these cars were just not reliable. After that, however, in 1989, Ford bought Jaguar after buying Aston in 1987. This acquisition between the 2 British brands is incredibly important because when Ford acquired both Aston and Jaguar, Jaguar were making the first prototypes of their F-Type. Aston then was given the design by Ford, which turned out later to be the Aston Martin DB7. Now this was a cost-cutting car, but I still don't care, I absolutely adore the DB7. It was based under the XJS's underpinnings, which was a car that had ran from 1975 up until the point where the DB7 was still being produced. And when Aston had actually made a profit and made success with the DB7, not enough to make Aston Martin anywhere near as profitable as they needed to be to keep going, Jaguar realised that they could get away with something like that. So they started and made in 1996 the Jaguar XK8, and then further on, the XKR. The original span of the Aston Martin DB7 and the Jaguar XK line was then stopped in 2004, the year I was born, and Aston Martin brought in the new Aston Martin DB9, starred by the same man that did the Aston Martin DB7, one Ian Callum. He moved over at that point to Jaguar and designed this. In my opinion, Jaguar's prettiest car they have ever built. The XK then started in 2006, with a later version, the XKR, coming in 2007. This is one of the first proper Jaguar XKRs. This is an original 2007 4.2 litre supercharged V8 Jaguar XKR. Ford, during the financial crisis, sold Jaguar off in 2008 when this car was only a year old to Tata Motors, who are responsible for the cars that came later, such as the XE, the F-Pace, F-Type, E-Pace and the I-Pace. Cars that still has not allowed Jaguar to make a good name for itself. This is the owner of this beautiful XKR. This is Andy. The funny thing is that most people wouldn't understand. He went from an XK to then an F-Type back down to an XKR. And most people, I think, would see that as a downgrade, because you've gone from a newer Jaguar, the newest sports car that Jaguar makes,
Yes.
back down to an earlier model.
Yes.
Why?
I understand that it sounds a bit crazy. The F-Type was compromised. It's a fantastic car. Beautiful looks, beautiful design, superbly fast, but I want a Grand Tourer. I want a softer, more compliant sort of GT. And plus, one of the biggest compromises of the F-Type was the fact that it was a pure two-seater sports car. Even though these back seats, as you may have noticed, are pathetically useless.
Yes.
At least I can throw a dog on there. You know, my dog can go in there. I can get a case on the back if I'm travelling across the country. It was just too much of a compromised car, and I don't wish to sound like an old person, but I prefer a GT, and maybe controversially, I prefer the looks of these as well.
They are absolutely jaw-droppingly beautiful. I will agree with you on the F-Type. I didn't think they were particularly well built. I don't think they were particularly that expensive feeling for how much you were paying for an F-Type, and also, that point on the GT, that's Jaguar through and through. This is why I believe that this is the last proper Jaguar. A Jaguar has always been a car that has been able to make an absolute weapon out of something that you can still use every single day and be comfortable with. It is a proper Grand Tourer. The F-Type is an out-and-out sports car.
Yes, agree.
That's going to lead us on to one thing.
Go on.
Let's go.
All right, then.
Let's
Do
go.
it. Right. I love that supercharged whine.
Oh, it's incredible. I've driven quite a few Aston Martins. I've driven the Vantages, I've driven the DB9s, and they were all automatics. The Vantage uses a regular manual gearbox with a paddle shift. It is a 6-speed manual gearbox with a paddle shift, with a computer that's telling the clutch how it's supposed to change. And they are disgusting to drive. I do not like an automatic Aston. This, however, this Jag, this gearbox suits the car really well, changes when you want it to. What you're getting is a supercharged British sports car that can go anywhere, be as comfortable as you want, and when you want it to do something, you just drop a couple cogs. The Vantage is a harder car. This is more comparable to the Aston Martin DB9, despite being a V8, not a V12. You're paying 25 grand. I know that you can get them for 18, 20, but from working on Aston Martins in the past, I can tell you that if you bought one for 20 grand, you're spending 30 overall. This, you're getting a car that is just as rare as an Aston Martin, if not rarer than a DB9 or a Vantage. You're getting such a fantastic engine with a fantastic note that drives as well as it does. I said to Andy one thing earlier, which I thought I would never say. I'm a manual purist through and through. If I would have an Aston Martin DB9 or an Aston Martin Vantage or a DBS, like my dream car, I'd have to have it with a manual gearbox, because the automatic boxes in Astons are just woeful. But this, I said I don't care that this is an automatic. I never thought I'd say that.
The one thing that this Jaguar makes me sad about more than anything, I mean, this car is fantastic. It makes me laugh like a schoolboy when I hear that whine of the supercharger. When it pushes you back into your seat, it makes you just feel incredible. But why it makes me sad to drive this car is I realise that Jaguar are never going to make a car like this again. Aston Martin, Lotus, Mercedes, every single car company, it seems at the minute, is pushing back their electric vehicle production. And a lot of companies as well that are selling electric cars, Tesla, for example, are losing a lot of their market. They're not selling as many, and electric cars, as the Porsche Taycan has proven, and the Tesla Model S Plaid, they are falling in depreciation. People don't want them. The only company that seems to still think that EVs are the only way to go is Jaguar. And with the current concept, which, to be honest, as a car, looks better than I expected, but as a Jaguar, I'm sorry, it isn't. And if that's going to be the way that Jaguar is in the future, it does make me glad that we've still got some old dinosaurs. We've still got some ways to reach into the past instead of spending £150,000 on an electric Barbie car that you would have given your kid 20 years ago. All the way back to these old, beautiful GT Cruisers that still have their link back to what they were back in the 1940s. This is probably the most important video I've ever made, with probably one of the best cars I've ever driven. So thank you for that. Take care. Long live the old Jags.